Hello everyone, and welcome to this latest video discussion as part of the RICS Tech Partner Programme. My name is Andrew Knight and I've been with RICS for over 12 years. I currently work in the knowledge and practice part of the organisation, looking at the effect of data and technology right across the built and natural environment. And with over 110,000 members working worldwide, right across that property life cycle through land, planning and development, construction, finance, valuation, brokerage, building surveying, asset management, building management, and indeed end of life, it's a terribly rich canvas upon which data and tech is having a hugely profound and valuable impact. And indeed, our members work across all the major asset types, whether that's land, residential, commercial, alternative, and infrastructure. So once again, a very, very wide range of areas and assets that our members work on. And today, I'm really glad to have Andy join me from ARC Aerial Imaging. So welcome to the discussion, Andy.
Hi, good afternoon, Andrew, and thank you very much for having me again. And good to speak with you as well.
Pleasure. Now, before we get into kind of the bits and bytes and the technologies, it's always great to sort of have a bit of a kind of the human element. So it'd be great to hear about your backstory, actually, Andy.
Well, yes, I mean, 31 years almost to the day, I joined the Royal Air Force, but I wasn't sure what I wanted to do when I did join the Air Force. So 6 months prior to November the 24th of 1992, I did my usual attestation tests, and obviously the RAF said, okay, well done. Here's a list of all the various trade groups that you've pre-qualified to potentially join the Royal Air Force on. And we whittled it down to about 5 trades, and one in particular really brought out and grabbed my attention. I think it was probably due to the glossiness of the brochure rather than the other ones, which were quite boring looking. So when I looked at this brochure, it was listed as becoming a photographic interpreter's assistant. For then on to become a photographic interpreter, and I thought, well, that sounds good. What's all this about? So I asked, and they said, yes, we've got an induction, a cohort going through in November of this year. So if you're interested in becoming one, then yes, we'll join you up, and we'll hopefully send you on your way to RS Swindon at the time. So the more I looked into it, and I thought, yeah, this sounds like a nice, good, clean job. And I wasn't academically qualified to become a pilot or anything, because obviously that's the tip of the spear with regards to becoming a member of the Royal Air Force. And so yes, it was 6 weeks or 7 weeks of recruit training at RS Swindon, and then I went on to do what's called Phase 1 trade training, and that was held at a place called RF Whitton, and that was all about the fundamentals of aerial imaging, target location, geodesy, geolocations, and things like that, and working with imagery to become a photographic interpreter's assistant. And then I went on to my very first unit, which was a fast jet squadron unit at number 41 Reconnaissance Intelligence Centre in 1993. And I was, again, assistant to the photographic interpreters, because we worked with mechanical aerial cameras that were fitted underneath several reconnaissance pods that would be bespokely fitted to the Jaguar GR1, or later on the GR3 aircraft, which is no longer in service anymore. So I kind of cut my teeth in aerial reconnaissance by using wet film photography. So the imagery was obviously collected by the pilots, where the magazines of film was then processed by the air processors, photographers per se, and then obviously this negatives and prints were then produced, and the photographers will do what they need to do in terms of writing reports and such. And a lot of that was involved in a lot of exercises here in the UK as well as elsewhere. And then I moved on to various other units in my career to try and develop as both as an analyst, or both as an assistant first, before I was nominated for promotion to become an analyst or a photographic interpreter. But there was a transition period in the sort of mid to late 90s where wet film photography, or analog aerial photography, was now going to become digitized. So when digital sensors became the next medium to collect data from, or imaging from, then of course digital remote sensing was starting to become the apparent medium. But and then the trade name changed as well, from photographic interpretation to imagery and analysis, and that was kind of in line with the other partners within NATO that also had the same sort of trade groups as well. So yeah, I did a bit of imagery analysis when I got promoted to become a corporal, and we analysed celestial imaging for various platforms, electro-optical, multispectral, infrared and hyperspectral, etc. So according to whatever the task required was, then we obviously analysed and reported from. And I've been moving around in other units. I did another tactical squadron tour when I was on 31 Squadron, which is a tornado squadron in the early 2000s. And I was also a targeteer in that respect, because I used to mensurate and grab accurate point positioning information, metadata information from accurate imagery to help the aircrew waypoint their GPS guided munitions to where they should be dropped at, and that was normally to an accuracy of around about a meter. And considering that the aircraft was probably dropping these payloads at something like 30 or 1,000 feet, it's quite an accurate way of sending the weapon systems to where they should be. And then I went back and forth to what was really regarded as the parent unit of imagery analysis, which is again still at RAF Whitton, and just continued to develop as an analyst, using obviously other forms of aerial imaging and also celestial imaging as well. Then I got promoted to sergeant, and then went on to 5 Squadron, which was at the time the Sentinel R1 GMTI and synthetic aperture radar sensor. So we were looking at movement patterns of life using ground moving target indications from that data set, as well as synthetic aperture radar imaging, which was acquired from the aircraft as well. So I did several tours with that. Of course, I did many tours on my previous units as well. And then I moved back to my parent unit, and from there I decided that I was coming to the end of my career at 20 or so years, and I'd like to continue on to do up to 30 years. And I did. I kind of signed on the line to say, yes, I'd like to extend my contract to 30 years. But at the time, I think I signed on for about, when I was about 18 or 19 years in by that time. At my 21 year point, I just thought, you know what, I think it might be time for me to sort of leave the service and maybe doing something different. And that's when I looked at either becoming an analyst for a company who obviously worked with satellite imaging, commercial satellite imaging, that is. But most of the jobs were pretty much centered in and around the down in the south, London and the southwest, etc. And I really wanted to come up to the northeast, where my family were from, and decided to settle up here in the northeast. And then the more I looked into it, I stumbled across UAVs, commercial aerial images, aerial vehicles, and I looked into towards resettlement training to become a drone operator, because I thought at the time where, surely if you're flying an aircraft or whatever type, you've got to be certified in such, and lo and behold, you do, from the CAA's perspective. And then I, did the necessary. It used to be called an NQE course, the National Qualified Entity on behalf of the CA. They had about 2 training companies or entities in the UK at the time. So I went down to South Wales and did sort of a ground school in the usual things when it comes to drones, airmanship and law and everything else that might entail flying a drone. And then obviously where I was practically assessed. In that time, I was trying to approach certain employers, particularly those who are operating the larger platforms, whether or not would they be scouting and scoping for employees to work with them. And fortunately, I didn't get much success in that. So I then decided, you know what, I'd like to try this out for myself. I'd like to start my own business, knowing the skill sets that I have from my previous career, and bring that knowledge with imagery into what I do with UAVs. Now, UAVs, as you know from other guests that you've had on your webinars, is that it is just a tool. It's the means of collecting data, but it's about the data that is more important than anything else. So bringing that knowledge into my business, and started off doing the usual generic aerial photography for several clients that I've got. I then wanted to go a little bit more technical with the imaging that I provide, and that's looking towards, and I have been doing since, is providing geospatial data for the likes of companies such as Alpha Beta, etc., on an ad hoc basis at the moment, by bringing that data into their projects and whether or not it's suitable for that particular project requirement. And yeah, I started off in 2014. I got my first permission for aerial work, which was a PFAW at the time, from the CAA in January of 2015. And obviously this has all changed now over the years to a PFCO, then an OA now, an operational authorization. And I'm currently, I've just been out all day this morning on a job in Bradford and where else was I? Leeds area. I'm currently in obviously with the weather that we've had over the last few days as
Yeah.
well. I'm actually renewing my operations manual at the moment at its new version 10. So I'm pending a 10th permission from the CAA that I'll be hopefully be awarded for me to carry on working with drones up to the maximum takeoff mass of 25 kilos. Predominantly, they're going to be multi-rotors, although I am qualified to fly fixed wings as well, because I've got a fixed wing certification on my GVC, which was awarded to me last year through an RAE at the time as well. So yeah, it's been 10 years of enjoyment, because the work that I do is enjoyable. Although I do find sometimes flying drones a little bit laborious and a little bit boring. As long as I've got good direction and what the client wants, that's great. But what I really do, what I'm really interested and really good at, and particularly enthusiastic about, is geospatial data. I love planning a flight with a drone, with the software, whatever software is compatible with it, to collect accurate imaging. Not so much in the terms of ground accuracy yet. That's obviously things to do later on in one's workflows. But letting the drone do its thing, although still under my control, but in a semi-autonomous manner. So watching the drone collect that data, collecting that imagery to how I want it, it's just remarkable. I mean, certainly with the software and the tech that's out there, it's just brilliant. And that's the sort of side of work I really enjoy doing.
And what's in your hangar in terms of the platforms you mentioned? It's mainly kind of rotor, but presumably you have some perhaps fixed wing. And what sort of kind of sensing types? What sort of payloads do you have?
The main payload types are predominantly RGB based sensing, red, green, blue sensing, the usual electro-optical type of sensing. So that's probably a 95% of the sensing type that I'm using on my drones. And they range between sort of 12 megapixel in resolution right up to, at the moment, 20 with the Phantoms, the legacy drones that I've got at the moment. But I have brought in other sensors as and when need basis. So with my Matrice 210, which is a larger drone, I can actually couple a multispectral sensor onto that. So I've used that a couple of times on ecology-related tasks. I will bring in the odd, depending on the client's requirements, of course, but I will bring in the odd user on a subcontractual basis. If they've got something like a LiDAR system, then obviously bring them into the mix. On a couple of occasions, if the survey has warranted the use of a fixed wing, then yes, I would have brought somebody in to do that on my behalf. But I've actually operated on 3 occasions the Wingtra Gen 1, which is the first generation of the Wingtra VTOL or hybrid VTOL platform. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with what that is. It's like an orange wing which vertically takes off, and it's very useful for working in very restricted environments in terms of environmental environments. And it obviously can launch from a static position and collect, as it would do, a fixed wing drone would do, collect a lot more data under one battery. Typically between 45 minutes and an hour's worth of flying time. So I've used 3 of those. Used that on 3 occasions when I've actually rented that in, because it's been according to the environment's extent that would be required to be mapped. I have done very large scale mapping of environments, particularly up in the northwest for the Woodland Trust, where I've had to use a multi-rotor at the time, and that was quite taxing and quite demanding, certainly with the environment that it's at. But obviously, as long as I can actually collect the data with an amount of resources I've got and the time that I've got as well, then obviously a multi-rotor can be applied in that manner as well. But yeah, the hybrid platforms are particularly good for very large extents, and also working within semi-urbanized and congested environments as well, which isn't too bad too.
So, I mean, Andy, can you give us a bit of a flavour of the kind of almost the range of jobs you do? Because clearly, drones are increasingly being used for some, very, very interesting, above and beyond perhaps what people traditionally think you'd use a drone for. So can you kind of paint a picture of some of the kind of specialised and perhaps more generic things that you're doing?
Well, the generic sort of work that I can do is, typically my client that I work with in support, I have done over many years, he has several tier 1 civil engineering and construction clients that we support their projects on. And that will involve generic aerial imaging on some projects, such as large infrastructure projects. The one that we did and we concluded last year was the East Leeds orbital route, which was a 7.1 kilometre long new bypass that we did. And what I did with that was not only where we were positioned along that route doing generics at major key points along that route, such as new roundabouts that were being built, but I actually used waypointed software for the drone to travel from A to B, from B to C. Obviously, we had to move on and on and on, because one of the conditions I have to adhere to is visual line of sight with the drone. I don't have EVLOS, or certainly I don't have BVLOS permission as yet, but obviously that could be something for me to consider in the future. What I'm doing is using the same software and the same flight over and over and again. So I'm doing almost like time lapse whilst the drone is traveling along in video mode as well as in stills mode. So you're getting a continuous output for the project stakeholders. So some of those generic aerial products can be done. I've also been invited in the past, although some of these tier 1 clients do tend to bring in subcontractors, surveyors themselves with their own drones to do specifically surveys of their projects, but on an ad hoc basis, I can actually collect that data as well. So some of that data may involve a section of a road that may need to be built, so I have to plan to collect that data correctly in order to produce certain geospatial data sets that the client or the geospatial analyst or the geospatial technician would probably require. Typically, it would be an orthomosaic or a point cloud, potentially a 3D model or a mesh. That's very much down to them to produce themselves if they want to. But the key data points would be something like a point cloud and a mesh, and all this tied in with known ground control point data as well. So even if I were to utilize a surveyor to do that work for me, that would be great. But obviously I've got the experience and also the knowledge on how to do that myself, because I've done a couple of courses with the likes of Corec, where I've learned how to collect that data correctly, so I can tie that that information into my imagery to therefore produce accurate and survey compliant geospatial data sets. And some of these data sets will adhere to certain standards of accuracy that the Royal Institute Chart Surveyors have decreed within their guidance documents. I think it's one document I always refer to clients, is that if you look at this banded table, this type of survey and this type of application of use, such as the drone and the camera and the imaging, realistic accuracy, you're looking between 20 and 50 mil. If that accuracy is good and it's suitable for that particular task, then yes, I can certainly potentially support you on that. If it requires a little bit more accurate data, such as 10 millimeter accuracy or less, or better, then obviously they're going to have to utilize an appropriate means of collecting that data to get that level of accuracy. So yeah, some of the accuracies I've been getting to clients is around about sort of I think the best one I've ever done was about 16 mil, which is pretty good. I think typically between 25 and 30 millimeter accuracy with everything that's all involved in the background. So yeah, those sorts of data sets can be requested. But one of the challenges I do have as a supplier of this data is trying to understand what the client really wants from this data. So I always start from the very end of the project, or the very end of what is it that you want that needs to be done, such as, you know, we want to do this, we want to learn from that, we want to understand what this. So I sort of work my way backwards to the point of, is the drone, is the sensor, and is the way that I produce those data sets, is it going to be applicable for the end result that they may need? Another challenge is dealing with those. I mean, certainly working with construction clients and, you know, geospatial technicians and surveyors. They're brilliant to work with, because they understand, they know exactly what they want. But sometimes, you know, when a client says, "Oh, we'd like an orthomosaic, or we want a point cloud, or we want this," I say, "That's great, fine, brilliant." And they said, "Oh, yeah, we want it in a highest resolution or the densest point cloud that you can produce." Yes, I can do that. Yeah, not a problem. But obviously, what file formats or what geospatial format do you need those products to be produced at? And of course, they might say, "Well, we're not too sure yet." It's like, okay, well, please do come back to me as soon as you know what you do, because I can actually, you know, create all sorts of formats as well. But the problem with that is that if they want the greatest, the best, and the highest densified point cloud that they want, can they actually exploit it? And that can be quite a challenge as well. Whether or not their IT infrastructure can be robust enough to actually not only open the file but also use the file type. So there may be ways and means of actually thinning out a point cloud, which kind of negates its usefulness in the end.
Yeah.
You're removing data points which might be important to them for their work. So that can be quite a challenge as well. And the other thing as well is dealing with intermediaries as well, because an intermediary might say to me, we haven't got the capacity or knowledge, can you do it? I'd say, well, certainly. What does your client want? Our client wants something like an Automosaic or a point cloud or this. I'll say, okay, fine, but what file formats? Oh, we're not too sure. Or certainly when I produce the data sets, they haven't got somebody to do things with it at their end, which is frustrating, because all I do is I produce the stuff. I can analyze some of the stuff, but it's probably not in the spec that, well, the task that's been given to me, because I'm busy with other jobs. I'm busy with other tasks. So obviously I would say to the intermediary, I'd love to speak to your client, because I can get an understanding of exactly what they want. But I get that some intermediaries are very protective of who their clients are, and they don't want to cut them out in that regard,
Indeed.
which I'm fine. But it's a challenge in that respect, and certainly them having the robustness of having the right equipment to view and analyze and do other things with that data can be quite a challenge.
Indeed. Now, I believe you've also expanded into actually delivering training courses for other UAV operators and indeed RICS chartered surveyors. Can you tell me a bit about how that developed and what you're delivering in that training space?
Yeah, I mean, since 2017, which was, well, that's a good 5-6 years ago now. Prior to that, I was reading on various forums, on various Facebook groups, and also on LinkedIn and elsewhere. People asking really good questions about how do I do this and how do I do that. And being ex-military, I was more or less open to help people. So yeah, this is what you need to do, and this is how you do it. And then somebody within the industry said to me, Andy, the knowledge that you're conveying to these people and others, you're not getting any reward from this. It's very, very good. You might want to think about doing a course in this, or maybe delivering a course in this. And it got me thinking. I thought, well, yeah, why not? I mean, towards the end of 2016, where the weather was coming in and I wasn't getting as busy as I am now, I decided to write a course, and completely from scratch, which obviously utilized the fundamentals and the key principles of imaging that I once used, but bring that into digital imaging and with drones. So it took me 8 weeks to write the version 1 of the course. It was a 2-day course that I run. I've now expanded that recently to 3 days. And it's probably at version 70 plus at the moment now, because the way I've always changed the course in its format and its content, and revising and refreshing to keep it more active and certainly more relevant with new sensors that are coming into the market, as well as new platforms as well. But you have to keep this kind of training up to date. So I have a mixed bag of people that come onto the course. I have those who are independent drone operators who want to learn how to do this properly, which is great. Obviously with some caveats involved, because if you're not a surveyor, you're a geospatial data provider. However, you really do need to be careful with what you produce. And how you go about producing it. It needs to be verified and quantified in terms of what the client requires in terms of what levels of accuracy that they need. So there are some sort of caveats in that regard. But I have also had several RICS chartered surveyors who've come onto the course. The reason why they've come onto the course is that they've not probably used raster data or any other sort of imaging data in their workflows until, of course, now with the precedence of having commercial off-the-shelf drones now easily available, they're now bringing those into their tool sets, and now utilizing imaging-based data more often than they once were. I suppose in the past they may have used or contracted a plane to gather some imaging for them, or indeed maybe even use commercial satellite imagery. But now obviously they've got their own limitations in applications of use as well. Namely, of course, using a plane may be expensive, but also buying in commercial satellite imagery, which I'm not sure how much it is at the moment in terms of per square meter or per square kilometer. But resolution as such may be a little bit of a hindrance, because of course the higher the resolution, the better the outputs you may get, particularly when you're dealing with accuracies as well. So I've had them on the course as well, which is brilliant, because I kind of use some of those individuals as a litmus test, because I do talk about certainly the language and the work that they use, such as using ground control points, such as using creating geospatial data sets in various accuracies. And of course, getting a few nods in the room from them, I'm thinking, great, of course, I'm talking as I should be talking with informed understanding about what they're dealing with as well, and of course conveying this back to those who've got no experience with it whatsoever. So it's a course that I'm always developing. I'm in, like I say, I've expanded into 3 days now because there is just so much that's involved, and it's not as easy as throwing a drone up and let the drone do its thing. You really do have to understand how you need to apply the drone correctly and also collect that imaging properly in order to produce not only 1 or 2 data sets, but other data sets that may be later asked. So it saves the individual going back onto the site. And whereas if the collect was brilliant, and it should be brilliant, it can be useful for other means as well, other outputs as well. So it's kind of saving that individual's time to go back onto site to do extra work to produce extra data sets. So yeah, I'm expanding into 3 days next year, and it's something that I'm really passionate about because I love standing in front of a crowd talking about this as a subject matter, and hoping to develop them further as a business, because we do get a lot of stick, particularly those who are not from a non-surveying background such as I, but who have a good understanding of such matter. But yeah, I mean, certain elements within the surveying community do kind of look down upon us because we don't have this, that, and the other. But when they see the results and when they receive the results from somebody like myself who hasn't got those, those degrees in this, that, and the other, they're like, my God, this guy does really know he really knows what he's doing about, and he really knows what he's doing. So it's developing their businesses, which is good for the community. It's also good for the industry as well, because we all look for the cheapest option when it comes to getting a service provider to do the work that we do. But cheap can cost more than just what it is going to cost
Indeed.
as an outlay as well. So it's something that I'm hoping that people would probably want to think about in the future, and certainly it's helping the industry look better in other people's eyes, particularly the profession and the professions that the RICS govern as well within. So, but yeah, it's something I really enjoy doing too.
Good. And just a final thought from you on the kind of future of UAVs in the built environment. I mean, there's drones in a box. There's obviously, as you alluded to, beyond line of sight. What do you see in terms of new payloads, for example? What do you think the next 4 or 5 years is going to bring for this sector?
Yeah, I mean, I think a previous guest mentioned about the drones in a box solution, which can be very much applicable for some of the projects I've been working on in the past. Obviously, you've got your large national infrastructure projects where you've got these boxes of drones positioned in key locations, and it's all a case of a remote pilot manager from a hub somewhere will probably launch a drone to do, I don't know, maybe for a very basic level of application would be just doing updates along a new route, and then the drone would come back, lands, and then the next drone further on will resume that particular task. And I have seen that particular application would be very useful for some of the projects I've been on. And I guess I suppose HS2 etc would probably be utilizing that sort of technologies in the next, I don't know, maybe 6 months to a year, or unless they're already using it at the moment. The payloads that probably would potentially be useful for mapping and surveying are similar to the sorts of payloads that I've used before, and that would be something like synthetic aperture radar imagery. Now, this type of imagery is very technical to understand and also technical to analyze. But the good thing about synthetic aperture radar, it's not weather dependent, so you can actually launch, I don't know, it may be a drone, but certainly would be something of a large fixed wing type drone that would need to carry that sort of payload because of the amount of weight that it probably encompasses with all the sensor itself and everything else that's involved. Will have its own onboard RTK corrective measures and electronics involved, so you won't necessarily need to do any ground control, but to a certain extent it will have have its relevance in terms of its accuracies. But that type of technology would be good for mapping, broad mapping, rather than just a pretty picture like an orthomosaic, because an orthomosaic is very much an understandable medium and output that a client would appreciate. So broader scale mapping would be very, very, very useful for that. It's kind of like LiDAR in that respect. And the good thing about synthetic aperture radar imaging, no matter what the grazing angle or the look at the angle of incidence, i.e. the beam of where it's looking towards, you will always get a consistent nadir looking image. So that's, I mean, even scale and measurements can also be drawn from that type of output. But that could be the next thing, you know, in terms of mapping and topography work, that could be the next thing. But a lot of that sort of work is going to be used for, I think, for that type of sensor is used for security work, I think. You know, identifiers and indicators and warnings type of work that I know that some companies in America are using at the moment. But yeah, I think the next thing would be, obviously it's going to be beyond visual line of sight. Whether or not we get a light version of that being extended visual line of sight, so you've got maybe one or two other support staff that might be you know 500 meters or so plus further on, they take visual custody of the drone, got two-way radio, the drone is still carrying on, I've still got good bandwidth, still got good feed from the drone, and they're seeing the drone, I'm not, because obviously it's gone a little bit further afield. Whether or not the CA would cater for that type of permission, I'm not too sure. I've not actually tested the water yet by writing something in my operations manual. This is what I'd like to do in the future. Would, you know, is it feasible? Is it safe? That's the most important thing. Is it safe enough for me to do it? But I've not done it myself because, of course, I still have to adhere to the VLOS stuff.
Well, fascinating. I mean, it's clearly a sector that's constantly evolving with new payloads and, as you say, potentially new ways of flying the drones. And as you say, a sector that I think continues to need to be educated and raise awareness of what's possible. But for today, Andy, thanks ever so much for your time. But I look forward to catching up again soon.
All right, brilliant. Thanks, Andrew, and thanks for the opportunity to talk.
Pleasure.